Hello, my name is Michael Gallagher. I'm the conservator in charge of the Paintings Conservation Department here at the Met. Welcome to this afternoon's Sunday at the Met lecture programme, organised by Education at the Museum and dedicated to the theme of conserving the paintings collections. This event is graciously supported by the Ehrlich Fund. The Met is fortunate to have a talented and extremely dedicated team of volunteers who offers crucial support to the Education Department in pursuing the museum's goal of making our extraordinary collections accessible to everyone. Pearl Ehrlich was a much-loved volunteer, but sadly someone I did not know personally. I'm grateful to Dwayne Phillips in the Education Department, who was a close friend of Mrs. Ehrlich, for letting me know a little more about her. Pearl Ehrlich made her first visits to the Met as a child, accompanied by her father. She went on to become an accomplished art historian, an artist, a jewellery designer, and a mother. I actually Googled her name at the weekend, and the whole row of different lectures she'd given at the Met came up over the years. It was very impressive indeed. Dwayne spoke of her extraordinary commitment and energy, and also of her love for Manola Blahnik shoes and an evening martini. I immediately felt a connection, and I refer to the evening martini, of course, not the Manola Blahniks. We are very grateful to the generosity of her family, many of whom are in the audience today, who appropriately created an endowed lecture in her memory. Painting conservation has developed into a rich and multifaceted profession. Today's lectures, I believe, will provide a wonderful sense of its demands and diversity. We have a tremendous team in the Painting Conservation Centre here at the Met, and its bedrock is the internationally respected group of senior conservators, Dorothy Mann, Lucy Bololi, Charlotte Hale, and George Basaka. However, this afternoon, each of the lectures is given by one of the department's 4 assistant conservators. You will hear from an extraordinarily talented group of individuals who I'm privileged to call colleagues. Our first speaker, Karen Thomas, has a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting from the School of Visual Arts, and a decade prior to discovering her true calling, she worked as a graphic designer. Fortunately for us, she saw the light, although she was talking about the font earlier, but fortunately for us, she saw the light and went on to pursue her conservation training at New York University's Institute of Fine Arts Conservation Center, where she earned a master's in art history and an advanced certificate in the conservation of artistic and historic works. She first came to the Met as an intern, but also obtained valuable work experience at Cranmer Art Conservation, the National Academy of Design Museum, and the Brooklyn Museum. Her talk today, Understanding the Evidence, the Technical Examination of Early German Paintings, is devoted to what could be called artwork forensics, and is one of the more fascinating aspects of our responsibilities as conservators. Please join me in welcoming Karen Thomas.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, and thank you for coming today. My colleagues and I believe, are fortunate enough to have one of the most interesting jobs in the museum. When I'm asked what I do, and my answer, I'm a paintings conservator, comes, I often hear a very enthusiastic response. Oh, how interesting, people often say. But then it's often followed by a pause and, so what exactly does that mean? I mean, what do you actually do? While I do enjoy having a job with a hint of mystery, today my colleagues and I are going to pull back the curtain for you and give you a brief glimpse into the range of responsibilities of the paintings conservators here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. For the past 2 years, I've been spending a portion of my time studying the early German paintings in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum. Dr. Marion Ainsworth, seen here on the left, curator of European paintings, along with Dr. Joshua Waterman, former research associate and now at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, will soon publish an in-depth catalog of the collection. My role is essentially that of a detective, trying to unravel the hidden history of the paintings. I assemble and interpret clues to provide as clear a picture as possible about the materials and techniques used in the creation of the paintings in order to attempt to discern what may have been done to the painting between when it was made and its current state, and to provide physical evidence to support or refute art historical and connoisseurship theories. Conservators have a number of methods of examination at our disposal when it comes to studying works of art. I will briefly touch on a few of the methods I use in my work and then discuss case studies which illustrate how these methods can help answer questions about a particular painting. In what may seem an obvious first step, I, along with Drs. Ainsworth and Waterman, simply look at each painting. We assess the overall appearance, looking for restorations, damages, aging defects, and compare the appearance of the painting to other known paintings of the artist in his time. To scrutinize the work of art even more closely, the Paintings Conservation Department is equipped with a high-powered binocular microscope, and here I am using it. This can be useful for assessing the condition of a painting, such as confirming the presence of restoration and damage, for example, the losses and discolored restorations around this eye, visually identifying pigments, examining artist technique, such as the gilding seen here, and closely examining the paint application. In the process of such close examination, at times microscopic samples may be taken of the paint layers. Such samples are usually taken adjacent to already existing losses or open cracks in the paint film. Samples can help us confirm the identity of a pigment or provide a cross-section of paint layers. Sometimes the presence of a certain pigment can help place a painting in time, confirm the presence of later additions or restoration, or explain a degradation phenomenon. This Virgin and Child, dated to around 1500, was painted by a German follower of Derek Boutz. The wall and window frame were of particular interest as I began examining the painting closely. Under the microscope, the wall and window frame appeared to have a glittering quality, as if there were a reflective layer below the paint. A cross-section sample helped us identify a technique used in this painting that is not well documented. With the help of Dr. Sylvia Centeno of the Department of Scientific Research, a tiny fragment of paint no bigger than a grain of sand was taken from the wall to the right of the figures. The sample was embedded in plastic and sanded down to allow us to examine the layers of paint. This photograph of the cross-section was taken through a microscope. It shows a bottom layer of whitish paint, which is the ground material brushed onto the wood panel, a thick paint made of chalk and animal glue. And at the top, we see a translucent red paint. Between the red and white area, there's what appears to be a thin, dark line on the left and some glittery particles on the right. By illuminating the cross-section with ultraviolet light, it becomes easier to differentiate the layers. We can now see the top is in fact 2 layers. The whitish appearance of these layers tells us that there is a significant resinous component. This means we're looking at a red lake glaze, the arrow is pointing now, which is a transparent red paint, topped by a layer of varnish. We can also now clearly see a thin dark line separating the red glaze from the bottom layer. This is actually an extremely thin layer of metal leaf that's been adhered to the ground layer. Scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive spectrometry, or SEM-EDS, performed by Dr. Mark Wapitsky of the Department of Scientific Research, confirmed the metal leaf is a combination of gold and silver. The presence of the gold and silver leaf explains the luminescent quality of this section of the painting. This information will be published in the catalog and is a useful addition to the technical documentation of ground gilding in Northern European painting. X-radiography is another imaging technique we use regularly. I realize this might sound surprising. At the mention of X-rays, the first thing that comes to mind is dental work or broken bones. In fact, we use the very same X-ray technique used for medical purposes. Medical X-rays work on the principle that some parts of our bodies, such as skin and muscle, appear completely or partially transparent in X-radiographs, while other portions, such as teeth and bones, are able to block X-rays, or are what we call radio-opaque. The more radio-opaque a material, the more it registers as white in an X-radiograph. X-rays of paintings work in the same way. This is because pigments containing heavier metals such as lead block the X-rays more than other pigments, so the differences between the pigments can be registered in X-radiographs. X-rays of paintings can reveal compositional changes made by the artist, losses of original paint, and the physical makeup of the painting's support. This is a detail of Lucas Cranach the Elder's Judith with the Head of Holofernes. And here is an X-ray of the same area. The varying radio opacity of the pigments allows us to see the composition, appearing in shades of white in the X-radiograph. The dark vertical stripes are areas where the original paint has been lost due to a split in the wooden panel support, and the dark curls are long vegetable fibers called tow. Artists sometimes glued tow across the pieces of wood in a panel in order to help prevent the joins from separating. A more complicated example is this copy of a Holbein portrait of Lady Guilford, the original of which is in the St. Louis Art Museum. When the painting was X-rayed, I was surprised by the appearance of the X-radiograph. Instead of seeing a clear image of a woman in the portrait, we found this confusion of shapes. I've digitally enhanced the image so you can see better where the form of Lady Guilford is on the panel. But what is the dark form running vertically through the image? If we rotate the X-ray 180 degrees, yes, and I again digitally enhance, we now see what's underneath. That was pretty much my reaction when I turned it over. So we now see a leg and the hem of a tunic. This leg is painted beneath the portrait of Lady Guilford. Therefore, the wooden support of this painting is a reused portion of a much larger panel depicting a life-size standing portrait of a male. Another method of examination routinely used in conservation is infrared reflectography. And here's Senior Conservator Charlotte Hale with our infrared setup. The infrared sensitive camera allows us to look beneath the visible layers of paint and see certain types of preparatory underdrawing. Here we have the Master of the Acts of Mercy depicting the martyrdom of St. Lawrence, painted about 1465. Infrared reflectography of this panel revealed a wonderfully graphic underdrawing. Here it is a little closer. So if you look in St. Lawrence's face, you can see this hatching under his chin, and there were these squiggly lines for his hair, and all these lines where the folds were drawn. It's very nice. Although the drawing was very closely followed in the painting, there were some minor changes made between the drawing and the painting. If you look at the collar of the red tunic in the painting, you can see in the drawing it was drawn as a curved yoke. And in the hands, there were slight changes made to the thumb on that hand and to the fingers on this hand. In other instances, questions about alterations to a painting may arise. This portrait of a woman of the Slosgin family of Cologne, painted around 1557 by Barthelbräun the Younger, presents an interesting example of the numerous structural changes that can occur over the life of a painting. It was clearly visible upon initial examination that the upper corners of this painting needed to be looked at closely. Diagonal hairs visible in the paint layer corresponded to obvious restoration and suggested some sort of structural change or addition to the panel. So an X-ray was taken to help clarify the situation. The dark areas are non-original additions to the panel and correspond to the cracks visible on the face of the painting. On the right side, the diagonal crack crosses through the red coat of arms next to the figure. This raised the question if the coat of arms was a later addition to the painting. However, close examination with the microscope, as well as analysis of this cross-section taken in the area of the coat of arms, indicated that the coat of arms was probably original. Therefore, The original corner of the panel must have been cut away at some point, removing a portion of the coat of arms. At some later point in time, the panel was reformatted to have its current configuration, and the corners and coat of arms were restored. This is not the end of the story, however. If we go back to the X-ray, we can see there's an irregular horizontal shape running across the apex of the panel. Because there's no indication of this damage on the front of the panel, one might hope looking at the back of the painting we could give a clue as to what this is. On the back, however, we find this, which is referred to as a cradle. In the past, cradles of interlaced strips of wood were fixed to the back of panels. This would flatten the panels while still allowing lateral movement of the wood, theoretically better preserving the painting. When a cradle was applied, the original wood panel was thinned to provide a smooth, flat surface. This was done by shaving the wood down from the back or even by cutting through the original thickness with a saw. And this is where our horizontal ghost in the X-ray comes in. This is saw damage created when the panel was thinned to a thickness of just 1.5 millimeters. When the panel was thinned, the saw blade must have gone out of alignment and sliced through the front of the painting. This painting presented quite a puzzle in terms of creating a timeline of the structural alteration of the panel. Although we cannot be entirely certain of the chain of events, here is what seems to have occurred. First, the panel was cut down at the top corners, trimming away the portion of the coat of arms. The panel was later reconfigured to have its current arching top. The painting was subsequently thinned, incurring saw damage in the process. The thinned panel with its corner additions was mariflaged or glued to another piece of wood. Wood trim was added to the sides, and finally, the entire compendium was cradled. Sometimes questions arise as to the attribution of a painting, that is, trying to pinpoint just who made the work of art. Here we have two of the electors of Saxony. On the left, Frederick the Wise, who ruled from 1486 to 1525, and on the right, his brother, John the Steadfast, who ruled from 1525 to 1532. In 1532, Lucas Cranach the Elder was commissioned to paint 60 portraits of these two men in both small and large formats. The portraits were intended to underscore the family's dynastic lineage as well as their loyalty to the emperor. Painting dozens of portraits, notwithstanding the small scale of many of them, including ours, would be an enormous undertaking. Lucas Cranach, however, was readily equipped for the commission. Cranach operated an extensive workshop employing numerous craftsmen and artists. So, for a serial commission such as the Elector portraits, while Cranach while Cranach might have painted some of the portraits with his own hand, he would have entrusted his employees to partially or even completely produce many of the paintings. This would allow him to deliver a large number of paintings in a very short period of time. But is it possible to determine who painted which paintings? In any workshop production, the paintings produced would intentionally not differ significantly in materials and technique. This leaves us with the problem of how to distinguish objectively between the various hands at work. Simply because of the human element, slight differences in quality must exist depending on the skill and experience of the painter. So, let's examine the similarities and differences between the two paintings and see how we can determine whether the paintings did in fact come from Lucas Cranach's workshop, and if so, what part Lucas Cranach might have played in the actual creation of the painting. As you can see, the paintings are identical in size and format, with the same light blue background. The subjects are both depicted in bust-length portraits, placed above a typeset verse, glued onto the lower third of the panel, and with a printed label attached to an upper corner. Let's look at the panels and how they were prepared. Here we have X-radiographs of the panels. The narrow vertical stripes are the wood grain of the panels. Both panels display a similar type of wood grain, and in fact, analysis confirmed that both panels are made from beechwood. Dendrochronology was able to date the panels to after 1533 for Frederick and after 1526 for John. And as you may recall, the commission for these portraits was 1532, so these dates are right in line with that. In addition, the wood from the portrait of Frederick was identified as coming from the same tree as 10 other paintings done by Cranach. We can also see a diffuse horizontal stripe pattern on both panels. This is related to the application of the preparatory layers on the panel. This pattern has been noted in numerous other paintings that have come from Cranach's workshop. Inset around the perimeter of the panel, we also see a thin, dark line, which is actually a scored line. It appears dark in the X-ray because the line has been scratched into the radio-opaque preparatory material. When we look again at the paintings, we can see that this line must have been used as a guide to indicate where a frame would cover the panel. As a result, the image is not painted out to the edges of the panel, but only far enough to roughly overlap the line. Furthermore, we can see half-moon shapes around the edges of the panels, and these are marks left by clips used to hold the panels in place while the panels were being prepared and also while the portraits are being painted. Again, the scored lines and the clip marks are unique characteristics found on other Elector portraits by Cranach's workshop. So far, all the evidence supports these paintings were completed in Cranach's workshop. The size, the wood type of the panels, the layout of the paintings, the thin preparatory layer of paint applied to the panel, the scored lines around the perimeter, and the clip marks. But what about how the paintings themselves were actually painted? And this is where we begin to see some divergence between the two paintings. At first blush, the two portraits seem fairly equivalent, painted in a somewhat schematic manner, both depicting bearded men dressed in white shirts and fur coats with black hats. But let's look closer. Here is a close-up of the right eye of Frederick the Wise. Note how the upper eyelid is edged with a dark brown paint, embellished with individual eyelashes painted in black paint. A white catchlight is delicately applied, entering the iris from the left. Now here is the left eye of John the Steadfast. Generally speaking, there's a slight flatness to the way this is painted. And if we look closely at how this is executed, the upper eyelid is not as sensitively painted as Frederick. A simple black line has been used to delineate the eyelid, and the white of the eye and the catchlights don't display the same delicacy of application as in Frederick the Wise. And for comparative purposes, here is an example of another painting in the museum's collection, St. Maurice, considered to be painted by Lucas Cranach along with members of his workshop. This painting is overall at a higher level of finish, but you can see that the eye of Frederick is stylistically similar to the eye of St. Maurice, whereas the eye of John, on the right, appears to be of somewhat inferior quality. So let's look again at the faces overall. We can also compare the manner in which the beards have been painted. In Frederick's beard, we see a lively interplay between the light and dark brushstrokes used to create the individual hairs of the beard on top of a fairly flat brown paint. Although John's beard is painted in essentially the same formulaic method, the sense of liveliness is absent here. The sensitivity of application and feeling of depth is lacking. A similar discrepancy can be seen between the fur collars on the men's overcoats. While both are painted with essentially the same technique, starting with a flat brown paint and adding layers of brushy, dark and light tones to create fur, the fur on Frederick's portrait is more convincingly volumetric and textured than John's. And finally, note on the left side background of the portrait of Frederick is a tiny inscription including a date, 1533, and a small winged serpent. While the appearance of the winged serpent, essentially the trademark of Lucas Cranach the Elder, does not guarantee the master worked on the painting, it is an important piece of evidence. So, comparing all the technical and visual evidence, what conclusions can we draw? The similarities in materials and techniques confirm that these paintings are both products of the workshop of Lucas Cranach the Elder. However, the superior skill with which the portrait of Frederick is painted on the left gives it a slight qualitative edge over the portrait of John. This increases the likelihood that Cranach himself may have had a hand in painting the portrait. For these reasons, in the upcoming catalog, the portrait of Frederick the Wise will be labeled as attributed to Lucas Cranach, while the portrait of John will be given to the workshop alone. The role of detective, investigating works of art in the service of technical and connoisseurship issues, is only one of the many roles I'm fortunate to fulfill as a paintings conservator here at the museum. Our work on the early German paintings will soon be coming to a close. In the near future, we look forward to the publication of Dr. Ainsworth's catalog. It will include even more interesting information about our early German paintings collection. Please stay and enjoy the presentations by my colleagues, which are sure to offer you even more insight into our work here at the Metropolitan Museum. Thank you.